I am not fit for any man, the curvy woman said, but I can love your children. The cowboy went quiet. The woman stood with her hands folded tightly in front of her, fingers pressing into the worn fabric of her burgundy dress as if bracing herself for a blow. The town street was quiet except for the distant creak of wagon wheels and the soft wind stirring dust along the wooden storefronts. People had already begun to stare. I'm not fit for any man, she said again, her voice steady but low. But I can love your children. For a long moment, the cowboy said nothing. Elias Crow had known silence. He'd lived with it since the day his wife was lowered into the ground, since the nights he'd rocked crying babies alone, since the long rides where the only sound was hoofbeats and memory. But this silence was different. It pressed against his chest. He looked down at the children gathered around him. Martha, barely 6, clutched her rag doll and stared up at the woman with open curiosity. Luke, 4 and stubborn as a mule, scowled at the ground. Thomas sucked noisily on a red candy, dirt smudged on his cheek. In Elias's arms, the baby whimpered softly, tired from the heat and the unfamiliar crowd. They were his whole world. And the woman before them, Agnes Miller, had been judged by this town long before she ever spoke. Agnes knew what they said about her. Too large. Too plain. Too old, though she was barely past 30. Women like her were meant for kitchens, not dreams. For service, not affection. She had buried her own hopes years ago when her parents died, leaving her to raise younger siblings who never came back for her once they grew. Since then, she worked where she was allowed, kept her head down, and learned not to expect kindness. Especially not from men like Elias Crow. He was everything stories were made of. Tall, quiet, broad-shouldered, with eyes worn deep by loss and responsibility. Women whispered when he passed. Some out of admiration. Others out of pity. When word spread that he was looking for help, someone to keep house, 10 children, bring order to a broken home, many women came forward. Young women. Pretty women. Women who smiled too much at Elias and barely glanced at the children. He had turned them all away. Agnes hadn't planned to speak. She had come only because Martha had wandered over to her stall earlier that day and admired the bread Agnes baked. Because the baby had reached for her finger without fear. Because something in her chest ached when she saw the children standing like lost birds behind their father. But now the words were out. I don't expect marriage, Agnes continued, her face warm with shame. I don't expect affection. I only know how to care. I know how to stay. And I will never abandon children who already lost their mother. The town seemed to hold its breath. Elias shifted the baby higher on his arm. He studied Agnes's face, not for beauty, but for truth. He saw tired eyes that had stayed up late for others. Hands rough from work. A mouth that trembled only when she mentioned the children. No calculation. No hunger for status. No pretense. Just honesty. You'd take them as they are, he asked quietly. Agnes nodded. Every day. Every mood. Every mess. Martha stepped forward then, small shoes scraping the dirt. She looked up at Agnes and held out her doll. You can hold her, Martha said simply. Agnes's breath caught. She knelt slowly, as if afraid the moment might break. When she accepted the doll, her hands shook. Elias felt something loosen in his chest. That evening, Agnes walked back to the Crow Ranch with them. The house was loud and broken in ways only grief could create. Shoes left where they fell. Dishes stacked but unwashed. Silence in rooms meant for laughter. Agnes did not comment. She rolled up her sleeves. She cooked without being asked. She washed faces and hands with gentle firmness. She listened, truly listened, when Luke screamed at night for his mother. She sang to the baby until his cries softened into sleep. Elias watched from doorways. Days turned into weeks. The children changed first. Martha laughed more. Luke stopped flinching when he dropped something. Thomas learned to say please. The baby slept through the night. Agnes never demanded space, yet somehow filled the house with warmth. She never tried to replace their mother. She simply became something else, steady, present, unmovable. One night, Elias found Agnes mending a shirt by lamplight. "You could have left," he said quietly. "Others would have." She smiled sadly. "I know. Why didn't you?" Agnes didn't look up. "Because I wasn't needed as a woman. I was needed as someone who would stay." Elias swallowed. In that moment, he realized something the town never had. Agnes was not too much. She was exactly enough. The next Sunday, Elias walked into church with the children and Agnes beside him. Whispers followed. Judgment lingered. But Elias stood taller than he ever had. Months later, when winter came and the ranch felt like a home again, Elias finally spoke the words that had been growing in his heart. "You said you weren't fit for any man," he told her one night by the fire. "But you fit us." Agnes looked at him, tears shining. "I never asked for more." He reached for her hand, slow, careful. "I am." And for the first time in her life, Agnes Miller believed she was worthy not just of love given, but love returned.